What's up guys, Crass here. Today I wanted to bring you some updated Necromancer builds after the Essence Mastery change to the game. And I think it actually shook things up a little bit. Not quite as much as I'd hoped, but still some interesting options out there. Getting into it first, I want to go over the build I typically use for dungeons, raids, the support battle in Shadow War, kind of anything where you want to bring a lot of damage as your main focus. And you can see here for the skills I'm using Soulfire for the primary, Command Skeletons, Skeletal Mage, Bone Armor, and Dark Curse. And you'll see I'm not using the Command Golem, and that's because with the Essence Mastery changes, I actually think Command Golem's not as good, and previously it was probably my favorite ability using the Molten Golem, but I think you can get a lot more power using the setup I'm using here, and I'll go into a bit as to why. So for our essences we're using Skull Veil to give our mage duration increase by 39%. We're using Cloak of Quills, which turns the bone armor into the thorns armor. We're using Linger Mantle to increase our Dark Curse duration. We're using Guided by Maggots, so the Dark Curse gives our minions Frenzy. We're using Pierce Hammer to give Command Skeletons an extra 19% damage. And we're using Welcome End to summon the Skeletal Mage version for the Grim Reaper. And you'll see the bonuses we get for the Mastery is an extra 9% duration on Skeletal Mage, an extra 18% damage from Bone Armor, an extra 9% duration to Dark Curse, an extra 7.2% cooldown reduction on Dark Curse, an extra 9% to the Command Skeletons damage, and an extra 18% Skeletal Mage damage. And the reason why I go for this specific setup is you can see if I summon the Skeletal Mage, and I'll show you Dark Curse as well while we're waiting. So you'll see by the time Dark Curse wears off, the cooldown will actually be up already. So you can see wears off and the cooldown's up. So essentially you have a 100% uptime on the Frenzy, and you can see as the Skeletal Mage duration ran out, the ability was back up immediately. Where previously, unless you were using Freedom and Devotion, there would be some downtime between the Reaper spawns, and that was kind of the downside to using it over the standard Mage. So you can see both my Reaper and Dark Curse have a 100% uptime. So you never have to worry about using an ability in a wrong spot. You can kind of just use them whenever they're off cooldown and get max benefit no matter what. Now for the Bone Armor, this one we don't quite get 100% uptime. You'll see by the time it wears off, I think I have about 8 seconds or so. Yep, 8 seconds left. So the reason why we're using that ability, partially it's because for the chest essence, we really don't have a lot of options. Essentially it's Bone Wall or Bone Armor to get any benefit out of this legendary. And with the Essence Mastery increasing the effectiveness of legendaries, I think it's pretty important to try to get use out of every slot. And the Thorns damage is actually really good on the Bone Armor. So by giving up Molten Golem, we're getting 100% uptime on our Mage, and we're also getting the extra 19% damage to our Command Skeletons. And Skeletons are pretty important as well for the Shepherd effect, since you'll need 6 summons to get the max benefit, and with the Command Skeletons you'll always have 4. Now I have a 3-star Echoing Shade right here. This does help as well for adding that increase, so I'm almost always at that 6 summons even without using the Molten Golem. But even if I didn't have this, like before I had this gem I was still using this setup, and losing out on one summons bonus is really not that big of a deal. Also for our set items, I am using a 2-piece Vithus, because I did need that in combination with the essences to kind of reach that 100% uptime. And for the Shepherd 6-piece effect, I personally don't care much for this anyway, because you can't control when it goes off and it has a long cooldown, so it's just very inconsistent. It does have times where it can really shine, like for example maybe in a raid you can get good use out of it, but I find I'd rather have 100% uptime on the Dark Curse, because typically what makes a build good isn't always maximizing damage. Oftentimes if there's a buff with a cooldown and you're able to kind of negate the cooldown to where it's always 100% active, that will very often be a much better build than something just focusing on damage numbers. And for the 4-piece Shepherd I use, one thing I did want to mention is, since this is focused on giving you a high crit chance, this does mean armor penetration helps a lot on Necromancer. You can see I am in Hell 8 or Hell 7, so I can farm Hell 8. I can't farm the dungeons yet, but you'll see I'm actually 70 lower in armor pen, so I'm dealing some reduced, or actually no reduced critical hit damage right now, but I'm not getting a bonus. And I will say, if you're far below the armor penetration for the Hell level, instead of the 4-piece Shepherd, you might get more damage out of using a 2-piece Shepherd and a 2-piece Shell Boss. Since the Shell Boss primary attack increase does affect your summons, so then they're getting 15% from Shepherd, 15% from Shell Boss, and then you're getting from your Vithus a 30% duration increase. And I don't have a Bottled Hope. I'm hoping maybe in the next month or so I'll be able to get some off the market, but Bottled Hope would make this build even better, since that will increase the damage and movement speed even more for your summons each time you buff them. And since we're using 2 buffs, you can kind of proc the Bottled Hope whenever it's off cooldown, essentially. And I think that's about it for this build. If you want to min-max your Reforge bonuses, typically the best would be increased summon damage and increased primary attack damage. Because the primary attack damage also increases your summon damage, so you're kind of double dipping. The third best I'd say would be beneficial effect duration, since that's kind of the focus of our build here, and it translates well to other classes if you do class change often. Critical hit damage is really good too, since if you're using 4-piece Shepherd, you do have, or you crit very often. And attack speed is always good just because it increases your animation speed. And getting into our next build, this is what I use when I'm farming Overworld or farming like Elder Rifts, anything where the content is super easy and it doesn't really matter how much damage you're doing and your main focus is to go quick. You'll see for this, I'm using the Command Golem, Skeletal Mage, Bone Armor, and Wraith Form, and of course Soulfire. And for the essences we're using Visitant Sign to increase our Command Golem's duration. We're using Flickering Warmth. I just realized my camera's been blocking that, sorry about that. We're using Flickering Warmth for the Orbiting Spikes on Bone Armor. Using Synod's Anointing for an extra Skeletal Mage, Graven Bulwark for increased Bone Armor duration, Desolatoria for the Molten Golem, and Twin Vestige so that we have Bone Skeletal Mages. And kind of the main focus of this build is, it's similar to the previous in that my goal is to get 100% uptime on stuff, because it doesn't matter how much damage you're doing for easy content like that, you just want to do it as quickly as possible. And I'm also using I don't have much for set items. I've been discarding a bunch trying to craft triples. I'd say the ideal would be 2-piece Fithu, 2-piece Shepherd, and then probably a 2-piece Isatar. And for this, the Command Golem, this will have 100% duration. The Mages, while it's not technically 100% duration, since you have 2 charges and the cooldown's pretty quick and reduced further, essentially you spawn one, when you run to the next pack, you spawn another one, and the Bone Armor, this also has 100% duration. So the cooldown will be up before the orbiting spikes are done, and beneficial effect duration does increase our Wraith form duration. You can see, I don't know why I'm invisible, but you can see by the time it ends we have 6 seconds left, and it's kind of like as fast as you can go for Necromancer, and your summons do a lot of the work, so you can kind of just keep the bone spikes orbiting while you're Wraith forming between packs, drop a mage, and then you'd have your golem do the jump, and essentially you're just always moving with this build. And Necromancer is not known for its move speed, of course, but between the 2-piece Isatar and the speed at which you're killing things, this would be very good. Very easy to keep up with other party members or even pass them up. You can see the Essence Mastery, what we get out of that compared to before the Essence Mastery. It's an extra 9% golem duration, 18% damage on the bone armor, 3.6% cooldown reduction on the mage, an extra 9% bone armor duration, 18% command golem damage, and 18% skeletal mage damage. And I will say the shield is the most replaceable essence, where I'm not really using it because of the essence itself, more so because it's giving that 18% damage on the mages, and then the bone effect can sometimes help out. But you can see some old legendaries like Beacon of the Lead, where previously I thought this was pretty good, but this is only giving you 19% golem damage, where something like Twin Vestige, only getting 1% less damage, although it is to a different summon, of course, but then we get that other added benefit. So pay attention to what you're kind of getting out of your legendary, and the same kind of goes for your normal gems and reforges, where armor penetration, so sapphires are really good. You'll want to try to get at least to the threshold of your hell level, but I try to be about 100 above if possible. And then for both of these builds, I'm just using Treasure Hunter, because I am behind. You can see most of my gears at 18, one at 21, one at 20. Treasure Hunter will give you more scrap and enchanted dust while you're farming, and none of the content's hard enough to where you need a specialized tree to help you anyway. But if you are doing something like a raid or a shadow war where Treasure Hunter doesn't do anything, you can swap over to Duelist is what I've been using, because it's not much of a point investment, where normally just getting the damage, you only need to put 10 more points here in Armor Pen, which is a good stat, and then all the other abilities you can pick up. So Duelist, good effects and not very costly in points either. And then for the PvP build, this is kind of what's been most fun for me and working the best. You'll see here I'm using Soulfire. One thing I want to mention too is the ultimate is actually very powerful. You do a lot of damage, insane range, and it homes in on enemies. So I know a lot of people might forget to use their ultimate when it's up, but if you can remember to use it and you use it at a good time, you can really turn the tide and essentially wipe a team without even trying, because you're so far away you can barely even see them. So keep that in mind That is the reason I use Soulfire. Otherwise, I know a lot of people like Bone Spear. I do think Bone Spear is good, and the animation's a lot better than Soulfire for PvP. The ultimate is not good at all, and since I like using my ultimate whenever I can in PvP, that's why I go for Soulfire. We're using Bone Spikes, Bone Wall, Bone Spirits, and Wraith Form. The legendaries we use are Hideous Dawning. Move my camera out of the way. This changes our Bone Spikes to not knock up enemies, but you get 3 charges. Essence Mastery is giving us an extra 18% damage, and we're using it in combination with the Shoulders Abnegation to add a knockback back to the ability. And we also get a 3.6% cooldown reduction, which isn't a lot, but it's nice. We're using Exhuman's Backbone, of course, to turn the Bone Wall into the Corpse Pillar. We do get an 18% damage increase from the Essence Mastery, which is pretty noticeable. You can actually do some good damage with an ability where your main focus isn't even the damage. I am using Proximal Fear, and another one I like using is Pitiless Pace. I will mention that Pitiless Pace, if you're a mobile-only player, this ability is not that great on mobile because you have to manually aim where you're teleporting to, and it's kind of clunky. It's not like Wizard where it'll just automatically teleport you max distance. Although Proximal Fear is really good. Typically, the best time to use it usually ends in you dying. Sometimes not, but the damage is pretty good. The fear lasts a long time. I'm using Communal Rib so that the Bone Spirits has a chance to fear enemies. And Drifter's Fair to turn Bone Spirits into the Floating Skull. And what I really like about this build is, like, compared to a build where you're using Bone Armor, you can actually do good damage with this and solo people. And because of how much CC you have in the build, if you're kind of staggering your ability use, you can actually kill people far above your resonance, just 1 versus 1, because they can't move, and you do some pretty good damage. Typically, I like to try to lead with either the Corpse Pillar or the Bone Spikes. Doesn't really matter which. Typically, I like leading with the Bone Pillar though, since it does do less damage than the Bone Spikes, and you want to try to guarantee the damage of your Bone Spikes. The Floating Skull does insane damage, and a lot of people either might not see it or just won't know to move out of the way, and if it ticks multiple times, they're probably going to get feared and lose over half their life to just the one ability. And another good thing about the skull is it persists when you die. So what I kind of like doing is running in with your Wraith form, hitting the fear on someone, and then shoot out both of your Bone Spirit skulls right away. And then even if they CC lock you and kill you, the skulls can still put in some work on their backline while your team kind of cleans up the rest. And as far as set items, it doesn't really matter too much what you use, although if you are really big on PvP and want to maximize what you're getting, I would say either a 4-piece Grace with a 2-piece Vithu would be best, since we have a lot of damage over time. Otherwise, you could use a full 6-piece Grace, because all we really get out of Vithus is the extra duration on the Wraith form. And while that is good, if you want to be more damage oriented, 6-piece Grace would be best. And that is all I got for you. I hope that makes sense, and some of the explanations as to why I choose these abilities might help you even make your own builds and kind of know what to look for. And if you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like and subscribe. That helped me a lot. And comment down below if you want to see more videos like this. Peace.